Well, I am mindful of Friday night. So it is one of those things where all of a sudden you're like, oh, that changes a lot. And I found myself thinking about preaching and thinking, that just changed things quite a bit. And I thought, well, it's really not about changing the sermon so much, but it caused me to pause and think, what is it like today for those families who lost somebody? What is it like this morning for those who were in the mall and found themselves running and hiding and traumatized, for those who witnessed it, for the law enforcement agencies that are exhausted today after the manhunt and being able to make the arrest yesterday. I mean, there's so many things that went on. And so we gather this morning with a sense of being a people who also wrestle. Like, why did that happen? So a few of us were here yesterday evening, and we gathered to pray. And not to say much, but we asked God to show up. And we prayed. And we asked God to come close. And we confess sin, an opportunity to make our hearts right before God as we ourselves can question. And we gave each other permission to not have it all figured out. And I think that's a really important thing sometimes, is to say, I don't know. But what I do know is this, and then you can speak how God has met you in those dark times. And Joe Springer, who's sitting up here, he shared about declaring God, declaring God's goodness in the past, and recognizing that God has walked with us through some dark times before, and we've seen the light of day after a time of darkness. So it's not this morning that we come necessarily to just wring our hands and not sure what to do. We do have one sense that God has already been through these things with us. But sometimes it can feel like, boy, we've been going through this a lot lately. Whether it's Charlotte or New York or in Aleppo, and our souls can become fatigued almost by so much hardship. And yet, we call ourselves this morning to this table to remind us that God is joining us and knows our heartache, and we are not alone. So we'll continue our series, and we find ourselves we started at the start of September with the Beatitudes, and we began with poor in spirit. Don Robinson led us through blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And last week we found ourselves, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And meek also as gentleness, and the gentleness of the Father. And this morning we find ourselves coming to, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they shall be satisfied. And you can find that in Matthew chapter 5, if you are interested in following along there in particular. Matthew comes as the first book of the New Testament. And I make no assumptions as to people knowing where things are, all right? So New Testament comes about 2/3 of the way through the Bible, which is something that we as Christ followers believe to be a gift to us from God. So I'd like to look at that passage briefly with us as we make our way to the table. And so it says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Eugene Peterson, a noted pastor and theologian, he wrote a paraphrase of the Bible. It took him many, many years, and he wrote this as his paraphrase. He wrote, you're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink in the best meal you'll ever eat. That's good. That's good to connect that idea of having an appetite for God. Well, and that could be odd for those who come to church or to spirituality, to Christianity, or whatever it may be that their soul kind of longs for, they go, what is it that I really want? And so you can hear the word appetite and you go, oh, yeah, I can connect with that. In Jesus' day, so this is when Jesus says those words, the region is occupied by the Romans. And the Romans are hard. They rule with a heavy hand. And if people get out of line, you're not going to make it. You're going to end up being crucified or killed or sent away somewhere. And so there's a group of Jews who are called Pharisees. And sometimes you may hear that word, and it means basically religious leader. There were several of those kind of groups, but this particular group, the Pharisees, they're really intent on being super, super good. If you do all the right things, then God will show up. If we do all the right things, then God will show up and we'll get rid of these Pharisees, or get rid of the Romans. If it's just perfect, if everybody can just get in line and look the right way. And that sometimes can happen in churches, parenthetically. If we can all just look Swedish and blonde and blue-eyed and be pretty and stout, 6'1", muscly, and everybody is polite, then our church will be good. Then our world will be good. Our community. Because the other is frightening to us. One of my favorite lines from the band U2, which if I'm here long enough, you'll recognize that I really am a huge fan. I've seen them live several times. I was close enough in one concert that my brother shook the lead singer's hand and then he squealed like a little girl. It was awesome. But Bono has a line and he says this, "There is no them, there is only us." There is that sense sometimes in our spirituality that we want to characterize some people as good and others as bad. And so to find that sense of there is no them, there's only us, what is that us? So when the Pharisees are finding themselves trying to be super, super good, there was a certain group of them called the bleeding Pharisees. And these guys were really intense. They so wanted to make sure that everything was perfect, that they never sinned, because if they could be good, then God would show up. Get rid of the Romans and life would be good again. They would walk around and they would keep their heads really low. So they would make no eye contact with anybody, especially not women. Because if they looked at a woman, it could cause them to lust, and then they wouldn't be good anymore. So they would have their heads down and they would bonk into things and literally have blood coming off of their heads. And so that was a sign of being super spiritual. Ever think about that with our own group? Of our own community of Christians who want to get everybody to fall in line and follow the same moral code and be good? Note that the text doesn't say, "Blessed are those who are righteous." It says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." Finding ourselves on the journey. So ever find yourself just having a perfect day, and you find yourself, I'm going to double click, there it is. I think it's not hitting it. Oh, there it is. Oh, awesome. It's just, sometimes it's got a bad connection. Ever find yourself wanting something? You know, it's when you're at home, perhaps by yourself, and you've had a long day. You were at Boeing, or you were at the office, or your kids just drove you crazy, or the grandkids finally left as much as you love them, and it is hard. And you lay there and you go, you know, my life would be so much better if. and then you fill in that blank. So I haven't done this with you yet. I'd love for you to turn to somebody. We're going to break that little barrier here. And you're going to turn to somebody. And if you're really brave, you're going to turn to somebody you didn't drive here with, which is even better. But no pressure. If you just want to go with the person you drove here with, that's good. And I want you to go ahead and fill in that blank. My life would be so much better if. Now, be careful what you say because, there's, it'd come back to bite you. So, but, you can have some fun with this. I'll just do it as an example. My life would be so much better if I had that moped. Oh, my goodness. That would be great. Or the 13-foot Bowler fiberglass RV. That thing would be, now my life would be so, see how I did that? So, it's pretty, we're not talking, I wish I had a new wife. That would be harsh. Don't go there. Not this morning, okay? Let's keep it, or husband. I didn't mean it that way, so. All right. So that was good. A little lighthearted. Gives a little breathing for that moment. My life would be so much better if. I think sometimes it's helpful to go ahead and state that because then it becomes a little bit silly. Like my life really wouldn't be better if I had a moped or had that Bowler trailer. I mean, it'd be fun to have, but my life in terms of being good, of real satisfaction, those things won't do it. Generally, that is that lie that can kind of like swirl around. And so the question would be, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. They will be satisfied. So where does that satisfaction comes from? And I found myself going to the place where satisfaction first was found. So when you go to Genesis chapter 1 and 2, before the fall, it is good. It's righteous. The kingdom is in place. And I love to do this. I love hearing the scripture and closing my eyes and imagining it like a movie. And so all of a sudden it goes, in the beginning, God created. Bang! Now whether it's 6 literal days, that this is where we can, like, as covenanters, remember it's secondary, so we can agree to disagree on different things, or you can use science and but God created. That's the big picture of Genesis 1. And so he says, let there be. I mean, I don't know if there was a big megaphone and let there be. Bang, light and dark. First day. Made the heavens and the firmament, separated the waters and the land. Let there be. Let there be vegetation. Up it comes. Let there be. And there's animals. And after each one, God says, it's good. Good. As a classroom teacher, most of the time in my regular life, apart from this, I walk around and I have my hands on students' backs and I'm looking over their shoulders at their work, and they want to hear, that's good. God makes creation and he says, good. And then Adam comes along, formed out of the dust, the red clay. And then Adam gets a job, which is part of the goodness, the kingdom, the perfect time, the righteous time. And he makes Adam work, tend the garden, love creation. And then he says, I want you to name animals. Oh, what a great job. I mean, what a fun thing to do, just name things. And the creativity of it. So he starts naming and hippopotamus and giraffe and tiger and liger, if there was one at that time. And so then it goes and all of a sudden, Adam has kind of an aha, and he goes, I'm not sure about this, but I don't think there's anybody for me. I'm noticing those 2 tigers walking off and a couple elephants over there, and everybody's got somebody, but not me. And then God satisfies him. Right? That hunger for more found with God is satisfied. So Adam goes into a deep sleep. God reaches in, grabs a rib, pulls it out, fashions a woman. And then the greatest wedding to this point happens. Adam comes out of his sleep and stands up and he looks ahead. And if you've ever been at weddings, you know that moment when the groom is standing here with the officiant and the groom looks down and the door opens and there she is. And it is just like, oh yeah. Adam has that moment. It is the perfect moment. That is the kingdom moment. It is in the birth of a child. So little Joe is somewhere around off with, in the nursery. But that little kid is so beautiful, right? It's in that moment when you hold your son or daughter for the first time and you go, oh, this is good. It's in that moment when you've heard the words of a friend affirm you and say, you are my friend. And you know that warm sense that you get like, oh yeah, I'm connected to this. It is satisfying. There are moments in our lives that come along and we go, oh yeah, I recognize the kingdom right here. It's in that space back there when people greet one another and you go, kingdom, right here. And we want to stay in that kingdom moment, that righteous moment, for a long time. But then, we find ourselves in a different space. We find ourselves in desolation. And it goes to a place that we get lost. So Adam and Eve, it's perfect. And for whatever reason, they decide that they want more. God is not enough. And literally, it all goes to hell. We live in a time that is hellish. We live in a time that can be kingdomish. Both exist in this world now. Look at the news, and you will see hellish moments. Watch the news and you'll see good moments. But it's in those desolate moments that we recognize, God, I hunger for goodness, for righteousness, to please show up. So on Friday night at 7 o'clock, the phones begin to buzz and the valley becomes tense. And we go, God, how can this happen here? It is because it is a broken world in need of God's touch. It is in tragic death that we recognize, I need God. It's in a failed marriage that we go, God, please show up. It's in an angry word that is spoken to us or that we speak that we go, I need God. It is in the destruction of creation. When you see a clear cut in the beauty of creation, you go, what is that? I need God. How do we respond? How are our longings met? I find that when we're on that journey, which we all find ourselves in, and some of us are in great places. I have to confess, I am having a great season in my life. Life is really good right now. I'm not sure exactly how those things line up right now, but they just do. I feel really like in a groove where I sense God present. And perhaps that's the case for you. And in that, then, the invitation would be, Step into other people's mess and bring God into that. And if you are in a messy place, I'd invite you not to hide. To come out into a place to be met by others, which is very hard to do when you are hurting. When you find yourself distant from God, show up. So, I hope this is okay. But Rock, I love that you're here. Thank you for being here and allowing us to be present to you. Those of you who don't know, Rock's wife Carol is going, she's dying. She's on her way. And yet Rock comes and sits with us. And we find ways to connect in that. The Nelson clan for coming. I know that diagnosis is sitting out there, but you're here. Thank you for doing that, allowing us to be present with you in that. This is true for us. It is true that in the midst of desolation, we who walk in a good space, we want to join those around us who struggle. And it's not just here. It's the neighbor. It's the classmate. I'll tell you, Monday at Mount Vernon High School, when they go to school, it will be challenging. On Monday, the school I go to, the teenager who lost her life, her sister is a kindergartner at the school I teach at. It's going to be hard. There will be lots of tears in this valley for weeks and weeks to come. Can we who are in a good space stand with our brothers and sisters? No longer them, but us. This, I think, is what it means to hunger and thirst for righteousness. To not be able to stand above the fray and go, I'm right, they're wrong. It is the hunger and thirsting for that kingdom time when all is well with God and you and this world. There's much for us to participate in, to bring goodness to this world. So we come to communion. And as we come to communion, I find it to be a place of absolute solidarity that God shows to us. In the first part of John, it says that, and Eugene Peterson in his message says that God came and moved into the neighborhood. God has moved into this neighborhood by way of Christ's death and resurrection. And so I'm going to invite my wife. I didn't tell you this, but hey, there you are. That sometimes happens in our house. Sometimes she just throws things at me and I have no idea what's going on. Okay, that's not even close to true, but I tend to be that person. So Dina, come on up. So we're going to serve communion this morning, and at that point, Trish and team will be leading us in singing, and that'll just kind of be floating over you. And you'll be able to come, and we'll break off a piece of bread, and I'll say, this is the body of Christ broken for you. And then Dina will say, this is the blood of Christ shed for you. It is the solidarity of God that when all went sideways after creation, that God said that he was still with us to create a new life. So we take communion this morning with eyes and ears and hearts that say, God, this place is hurting right now. Come and meet us with this. And so I believe that this food is food for the journey ahead of you. Now, in some traditions, you may come and you may have had to have taken a class and, figured out what the bread and the wine, all that stuff means. Here at Crossroads Covenant Church, we don't have a class. Our class is simply showing up. And if you would like to take communion this morning, you are welcome. Whatever background you come from, whether you've had a great week or a terrible week, this is for you. And I like to think of it this way. It's an ABC. When I take communion, I say that I admit that I need God. I need Jesus. And the B is I believe that Jesus, in as much as I'm able to believe right now, comes and meets me and heals my brokenness. And then the C is I commit to follow Jesus as best I can today. whatever that may look like. So, on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took bread, and he broke it, and he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Take and eat, all of you." He did this with his friends. Jesus calls you his friends. This is for us. Likewise, he took a cup, and he said, "This is the new covenant, a whole new way of doing things. The old is gone, and the new day is come, and I heal your brokenness. Take and drink, and do this as often as you remember me." So we remember Jesus today in light of a hard week.